Has Putin had enough? Is he going to make good on some of his recent threats? Is there a path to end the war? Has the U.S. presidential debate and the U.S. presidential election cast a dark pall over this that may actually hasten an end to the war? What happens if Trump wins? All of these things are swirling around right now, mixed in the middle of this ongoing conflict where people keep dying every single day, and the outcome remains maybe not shrouded in mystery, because I think it's pretty clear where it's headed. But how it's going to end, when, and what's going to happen in between now and then is very, very much up in the air. There's some good news there. It's not completely hopeless. There is a path to bring this to a conclusion that would be at least palatable or tolerable, almost like taking medicine, but something that can be done. So it's not an impossible situation, but it's going to require a lot of changes, especially among the West. We're going to get into that today. But first of all, I want to take a look at this issue of, has Putin finally had enough, and is he going to do something? Has a red line that he's been talking about, has it actually been crossed, and what's going to come next? One of the most poignant, I guess, near-term issue is last weekend when there was a attack by U.S. ATACMS missile that either was misfired or was had been intercepted, partially intercepted by Russian interceptor missiles, and partially detonated over a crowded beach that killed a number of people, wounded over 150, I think, altogether, which just outraged the Russian public and their senior officials. It happened not just that it was on a beach, not just that it was civilians, but it was also on a religious holiday. It came on a day when there were two other terrorist attacks inside of Russia. And the view seems to be that a lot within Russia, especially among some of the hardliners, view this as, all right, that's enough. That's over a line. Right after this, the new Russian Minister of Defense had a phone call with U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Allegedly, this was at the behest of Lloyd Austin. We'll see how that works out. But here's what Pat Ryder, General Ryder, the spokesman for the Department of Defense, had to say about that meeting.
Secretary Austin also spoke by phone today with Russian Minister of Defense Andrei Belousov. During the call, the Secretary emphasized the importance of maintaining lines of communication amid Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. The last time Secretary Austin spoke to his Russian counterpart, then Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu, was on March 15, 2023. A brief readout will be posted to defense.gov.
Now, as we've talked about when we've mentioned this before, the readout merely said they talked. It said absolutely nothing. I mean, literally nothing about the content and the substance of what that call had. But we had former CIA analyst Larry Johnson on the show, who gave his view of what actually did take place during that call.
Lloyd Austin called up the defense minister the other day, Belousov, to say, "Oh, let's have a chat. Let's catch up, buddy. We haven't talked for a while. Let's bygone be bygone." No, that's not what happened. Belousov told him in no uncertain terms, "You bring any more of your crap in the Black Sea, it's going down. I'm putting you on notice. You do however you want to respond, but we're not going to put up with this anymore."
Now, what Larry was talking about there specifically, it wasn't just intuition. There was a statement posted by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Gary, if we can throw that one up there. This was on Telegram channel yesterday, I think it was, or day before. No, it was yesterday. That's right. The Russian Defense Minister Belousov instructed the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces to, quote, take prompt response measures to the flights of American drones over the Black Sea. He noted the increased intensity of flights of U.S. strategic unmanned aerial vehicles over the Black Sea, which carry out reconnaissance and targeting designation of high-precision weapons supplied to the armed forces of Ukraine. Now, that's what it was resulted from the attack on the Sevastopol beach, because those are weapons, those missiles cannot fly unless they have highly trained experts operating the missiles themselves and the launchers. But even more so, it has to have targeting data from high-tech reconnaissance assets, i.e. U.S. drones, and like the Global Hawk and some of these others, or even satellite reconnaissance. It has to have stuff that the U.S. is providing. And of course, as you may have heard, There was a flight of a U.S. drone in the Black Sea right about the time of this happened, which gave the impression that that's what it was being used for the purpose of directing those missiles onto a Russian airbase, which was right near that area. But the problem is, are they going to continue to fly? Because so far, or not so far, even that flight that was referred to there was in international airspace. And there have been many times, in fact, it's been routine that U.S. reconnaissance assets routinely fly in the Black Sea to provide reconnaissance, intelligence, et cetera, on Russian locations, and then they send that back to the Ukrainian side. I've frankly been surprised that Russia was unwilling to take those down, because we know this. You may recall last year there was a kind of a famous incident where some of the Russian jets buzzed one of our drones, and some of the jet wash ended up knocking it out of the sky. It fell out. But that was the only time that happened. And that was just kind of a flyby. They have not taken direct action to bring any down. Now then, Larry Johnson believes, and certainly the implication is there, that Russia could be serious about taking those out, meaning that he may be willing, Putin, to say, all right, this attack on the beach, that was overline. Now it's too far. Now you fly those assets again, we're going to take them out. And if Larry Johnson's right, and that's what was communicated to Secretary Austin, we're going to find out, are we willing to find out and call Putin's bluff again and see if he really means he's going to shoot him down? Will we risk losing that asset, because they're millions of dollars? Or do we say, let's don't risk it, he actually means it? And then, of course, that means that Ukraine is going to lose an asset, an ability to fire into Crimea with some of these high precision missiles. Now, of course, it's meaningful to point out, or important to point out, that those missiles did not hit their target. All 5 of them were taken out by the Russian air defense capabilities. That's not always the case. Some of them do get through, and there's been some pretty spectacular hits on some of the military bases in Crimea that the Russians that are using. So those have continued on. It hasn't had any impact in the war. And I want to point out that that's part of the frustration of some, because we're risking escalation on something that has no prospect of actually impacting the front lines of the war. If you're going to be firing any kind of weapon system, it has to have some prospect of making a meaningful impact at the point of contact where the war is being fought. Now, it's valid to say maybe we can hit something deep that could interrupt their ability to get supplies to the front. That's a valid situation. But if it's not going to materially help that, and it's not, then you have to say, then that's a waste of opportunity, because you could actually be firing something closer to the front line that might have an impact on there, and you don't risk the escalation of crossing the strategic red line. We'll see how that's going to happen. And then we'll see, what happens next if U.S. flies one and it gets shot down. That remains to be seen. But the question is Putin serious on that? In terms of where this war could go, now we're going to talk some about what happened at the national debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump yesterday, or day before yesterday. And it was a really, really kind of amazing situation, because it had dramatic impact. It had a dramatic moment that has significant impact from Georgia, where it took place, all the way over into Russia-Ukraine war. We're going to see how that's going to happen in a minute, or how that impacts in just a minute. But first of all, I want to show you something from Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who talks about we had him on the show, and he was talking about a lot of the complications and the difficulties of, where's this red line? Where's that red line? Whose position is here? How would this is going to happen on the ground, on the line of contact? And he said, you can strip all that away, and there is a way to bring this to an end. And it's not, as he says here, pie in the sky.
In the case of Ukraine, pick up the phone, call Putin, and say, that whole NATO thing that I was in favor of from 1997 onward, well, it didn't work out all that great. We'll stop the NATO enlargement. We'll make it public that we're stopping it. We understand that's a red line of yours, but you stop the war, and we'll get down to negotiating the details. But let's end this thing. That literally could happen in one phone call. That's not pie in the sky. This whole thing starts back in 1997 with the NATO enlargement, with Brzezinski saying, hey, why don't we surround Russia in the Black Sea region with the NATO countries, including Ukraine and Georgia? One phone call could end this fighting.
And that one phone call, almost the only person authorized to pick that phone up is Joe Biden. But he has made very clear that he's not going to do that. In fact, everything he and his administration, we've shown this, just ad nauseum almost for ever since we've had this channel about 9 months ago, that he's going to, quote, for as long as it takes, support the Ukraine side. Everything bad that's happened on the battlefield, all the dynamics that we've talked about 100 times, seem to be, he was impervious to paying attention to that. And that's a theme we're going to see kind of through the rest of this episode here. Some of the comments that I'm going to show you is that there's just kind of this dystopian inability or unwillingness to recognize just evidence, just physical evidence. But because Trump wants to win an election in his part of the debate, he was very, very clear about where he would take it if he's elected.
The money that we're spending on this war, and we shouldn't be spending, it should have never happened. I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled.
Okay, that's obviously hyperbole. Without the power of the presidency, you can't do anything because you're not authorized to pick up that phone and talk to anybody until January 20th, 2025, should he win. But because of what else happened during that debate, and I won't show it again here, but it's certainly everybody around the world practically has seen it now, where Joe Biden froze. He stumbled over his words. He lost his train of thought. He had the senior moment that the Democrats were so afraid of. And then many of his other comments were just kind of non sequitur, didn't make any sense. Many times the sentence would just be stopped in the middle. He'd start a new sentence, stop in the middle. His eyes, he would be. All of those images have had a profound effect, not just on the American public, not just on Zelensky, not just on Putin, but specifically on the Democrats, because now then the senior Democratic leaders are scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. Because here's the problem. Everybody saw this. You can't hide this anymore, though some are trying. We'll see that in a second as well. But here's the fact. When you have the New York Times, which is like almost the banner publication for liberals and Democrats in the United States, having this headline, "To serve his country, President Biden should leave the race." That is a shocking headline. Big picture there. It's the editorial board. So it's basically the power of the entire New York Times. It's not just some person who wrote an op-ed. That obviously is going to be seen far and wide. In my view, when he made that gaffe at the beginning, because it was about barely 5 minutes into the debate, I turned to my wife right there. I said that he just lost the race. That you can't recover from that, because everyone was afraid of that. And even if he didn't recover, or even if he did recover later in the debate, and I don't think that he actually did, that one by itself is going to be too much. And apparently that's what the Democratic leadership thought. And according to this Axios poll, a significant majority of Americans think, because they say 60% of the voters here want Biden replaced as a candidate. They don't think that he's got what it takes. And, that's kind of evident in what he said there, because if you can't even get through a debate, if you can't handle the pressure of talking to a political opponent on a stage for 90 minutes, what are you going to do if you get into a life and death situation with a foreign head of state? What if there is a crisis somewhere, a military crisis with the Xi Jinping, or some kind of direct conflict with Vladimir Putin, which could go nuclear, or even something lesser but still huge in the Middle East? What if Israel plunges into Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon and starts a war there that draws in Iran? And now then the president of the United States has to decide, are we going to enter into a war? And there'll be huge pressure for him to do that. Or is we going to stay out? What are we going to do? What are the ramifications? Incredible pressure. I genuinely cannot imagine how much stress and pressure that is on the shoulders of the one person who has the power to make the decisions for war and peace, not just for the United States, but for our allies. And look, it's just, it's too much. And so people can see that. And now then, when the Democratic Party itself has said that, and I think I may have mentioned previously that I watched the ABC News, which is leans liberal, in the United States, when their post-debate situations, they had a lot of pro Democratic advisors and analysts and pro-Republican advisors and analysts, and they went first of all to the pro-Democrat analysts, people who were well tied in with the senior leaders, and right off the bat, they're immediately saying, "Oh yeah, the Democrats are in panic mode. They're already talking before the debate was even over about we may have to replace him. How would that work, etc." So the cat's out of the bag. Once you had that headline that I showed you from the New York Times, these other comments, they're all over the news. CNN apparently was even worse from some people who watched that I didn't see that one. It's done. So the question is going to be, what now? What impact is this going to have? Who are they going to find to replace him, and what would their policy be on the Ukraine side? Now, as I said a minute ago, that the kind of delusion is going to be one of the unpleasant themes of this video here. Here's the first one I'm going to show you, because in light of all that's happened here, President Biden went to North Carolina yesterday and gave a speech. Many people were really interested in, in really paying attention to what would he say. Is he going to drop out? Is he going to address what happened yesterday? Yeah, he kind of did, but he didn't want to drop out. Instead, he said this.
But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth. I know right from wrong. And I know how to do this job. I know how to get things done. And I know, like millions of Americans know, when you get knocked down, you get back up.
Yeah, but see, folks, this ain't a basketball game. This is not like a 7-game series for the championship or something. If you get knocked down to one, and you can get back up and fight again the next day, and maybe win the next battle. This isn't like that. When you make a gaffe, and not just a gaffe, that really wasn't a gaffe. Wrong word. When you make a disastrous move like what happened here, and you expose, this is the core reality of what we are dealing with here. This is only going to get worse. Unlike a basketball game or a football game or cricket or anything like that, where you can come back and you can pick it up and just knock it out of the park the next day. It's not like that with dementia. It's not like that when you have your mental capacity starting to deteriorate. They don't get better. I actually had you can see it on our channel. I had a tweet that I did in February of this year, early February, when President Biden had made a very, very similar gaffe. And I made the point then that as you get, more into the presidential campaign and all the pressures that go with that, along with the war in Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East, issues with China, I said, the pressures are just going to be too great, and this is only going to get worse. That's what I said in February, and exactly that same thing happened here. That's no kind of brilliant analysis on my part. It's self-evident. That's just how dementia works. That's how it works when you get 81 years old. That's just normal part of the human aging process. So it's self-evident that it's not going to get better. And while Joe Biden says he knows what he knows, well, in a moment of clarity, here's somebody else who knows what they know, and that is Volodymyr Zelensky, who had this to say kind of in the aftermath of this.
We don't have too much time because we have a lot of wounded and dead people on the battlefield and through civilians. That's why we don't want to have this war during years.
So he recognizes that we time is running out. That was on the same day of the debate. I think that actual recording was made before the debate, but it was on the same day. It makes one wonder if he was getting some inside information from somebody who knew that the Biden wasn't going to have a good day, that this very thing could happen. And so he was concerned that they're running out of time to try to figure this out. Now, that's what he said on the 27th. But here's now back to our delusionary kind of thing, and then deciding to not pay attention to reality. That same Zelensky had a press conference with the I believe it was the president of Slovenia, I think it was, where he says, you know what? We're going to chart a comprehensive plan to end the war with Russia, and we're going to have a comprehensive peace, and we're going to have a new peace plan. So it's not like the one from Switzerland had this being ringing success. In fact, it has been routinely, globally panned as the ridiculous thing that it was when you don't even invite Russia to the negotiations, when you still have in place a law that prohibits you from having negotiations with the Russians, that you want to then say, we're going to have a comprehensive peace plan. And now he just signed with Joe Biden a 10-year plan for support that he thinks is going to just basically take this war on into the infinite future, because so many people love these forever wars. But folks, that's with Joe Biden. That didn't have Senate approval. Ergo, it's not on the United States government, something that will perpetuate and exist no matter who's in the White House. It only matters if the guy in the White House says that. And since I just showed you that former President Trump is adamant and consistent that he will end the war in Ukraine if he is elected, that document is only good so long as Joe Biden's in office, and that ain't going to be 10 years. It might not even be 10 more weeks, depending on how things go here in the next near term here. So that leads to the question then again, what is going to happen on the ground? What are we going to do? Because Biden added this. I'm sorry, I had one more thing from Biden. Well, I'll just let him speak for himself on this one.
The idea that somehow we are this failing country. I never heard a president talk like this before. We're the envy of the world. Name me a single major country president who wouldn't trade places with the United States of America for all our problems and all our opportunities. We're the most progressive country in the world in getting things done. We're the strongest country in the world. We're a country in the world who keeps our word, and everybody trusts us. All of our allies and those who he coddles up to, from Kim Jong-un, he sends love letters to, and Putin, etc. They don't want to screw around with us.
See, now during the debate, he didn't stumble over his words on that one. He was relatively clear and concise and consistent with the things that he's saying there. But that's even a bigger problem, because I think he believes that. He believes that we are the greatest power in the world, in the history of the world, as he said. We've shown that many times here from back in October of last year, that we're trusted all over the world by our friends and adversaries. But are we trusted by our adversaries? And let's get back to Putin himself. I mentioned what he had said at the outset, and he had his Minister of Defense contact the United States and apparently issue a warning. Here's what he himself said at the occasion of a military deal he signed in Pyongyang with North Korea.
Time and again, the West is using its tired propaganda cliches, but they're clearly ineffective in realizing its goals, including in Asia. This confrontational policy pursued by the United States to expand its military infrastructure in the region goes hand in hand in the growing scale of military exercises involving South Korea, Japan, and they're clearly hostile with regard to the DPRK. Such steps undermine peace and stability on the peninsula and threaten the security of all the countries in Southeast Asia.
So there's no trust there whatsoever. And Putin, in many other cases, I think if you recall, I think it was in February when Putin had this big interview with, let's see, who was it? Tucker Carlson. That's right. It was made all the news back at the time. And one of the themes that he hit there was he had no trust with the West. Absolutely none. This is in February. This is going back to February. And he specifically talked about the Minsk agreements and the things that we had claimed and then had no intention to make good on. And so he's asking, who do I have to work with? What kind of a deal can I get with somebody I don't trust? And that's a theme that runs throughout the Russian elite and their leaders, et cetera, that they don't believe they can trust the West. It's funny because here in the West, we always talk about how we can't trust Putin. He doesn't ever keep his agreements, blind to the fact that we ourselves, and it's now been exposed in public by the West, by the Western leaders themselves, that we never intended the Minsk agreements to be followed, that we just wanted it to buy time. Now, when you say that publicly, they can be suspected. But when you have Angela Merkel, to be specific, one of the French leaders, to be specific, actually admitted that that was the case. So knowing that now, then you see that there is no trust. But you have Joe Biden sitting there before the United States public and the global audiences who was watching, saying that everybody trusts us, our friends and our adversaries. And we know that there's just no truth to that at all. So if he's the guy that's in charge of that, you can see where there's a big problem in what kind of relations the Russia wants to have with the West and what they're going to do to achieve their national interest. Every country is supposed to do what's best in its country's interest. The United States is supposed to prioritize our national interest, even above the NATO alliance, even above the Taiwan or Japan or Australia, everybody else. I mean, we have friends and allies and mutual agreements, but all of that is supposed to say we'll prioritize our needs if it ever comes to a decision between who's we're going to work on, who's we're going to value and who's we're not. That is the case with Russia. So they're going to do whatever they think is in their national interest. Now, we saw at the beginning here, Jeffrey Sachs said, all we got to do is pick up the phone and say, hey, we'll cut this thing off. We're going to end this. Whether Putin would have believed that or not, I don't know. And everything is in the actions. If those words were followed with actions, then he might. But he's probably going to say now that he's not going to be satisfied with just words and something written on a piece of paper. He's going to have something that he can have control over. And that's the real issue about what's going to happen next, because whereas I talked at the opening of this, has Putin had enough, and will he make good on his threats, specifically on shooting down U.S. drones in the Black Sea? What he has already made good on is his actions abroad in many other areas about how he's expanding. Now, we wanted at the first to isolate Russia, to put them under these sanctions, to cut off anybody who wanted to do business with them so they'd be isolated and that their economy would shrink and collapse, etc. And what has happened? That video I just showed you was from Pyongyang. So he has a new partnership military deal with North Korea. They have expanded ties with China. Some evidence coming out that China may actually be routing some of their weapons through North Korea, even potentially. But we know for sure that they're helping him in some non-direct ways that have implications for their military stuff. But they're politically and economically are strengthening ties for sure. After Pyongyang, Putin went to Vietnam, signed a new set of economic agreements with them as well. They have new agreements with Iran. Direct military connections with especially weapons of war. All of those things. They're moving further into Africa. They're actually displacing some of the American military in Africa, in Latin America, South America. They're continuing to make moves there. Folks, they're not isolated. Putin is taking action right now to expand his influence, to decrease American influence, and that's happening off the battlefield. On the battlefield, things continue to go in Russia's favor. Now, apparently, they're suffering lots of casualties here, especially in the northern part of the Kharkiv area. But I keep underscoring, they're also inflicting enormous numbers of casualties. And as we had Mike Domino on that showed you with some new research that he's conducted here, there is a massive benefit and increase in the number of troops that are available to the Russians than there are to the Ukraine side. Ukraine can't get into a battle where they keep losing, trading, casualty for casualty. They can't do that. It's a war of attrition. Russia has a massive amount, millions more men from which to draw that they could use in the war. They have industrial capacity that dwarfs anything at all that the Ukraine side could ever muster, with all of the Western alliances on top of that. Their air power, air defense, engineering support, electronic warfare support, especially. And now then they're getting direct support from allies across the world in volumes and in ways that the West has not been able to even match, much less surpass. Ergo, there is no path by which Ukraine could even hold on, much less even fantasize about going forward. And here's just a simple evidence or example of how this delusional thinking in America extends even to the so-called elite and people who are supposed to know better. This is just one simple example I'm going to show here, but it is broad-based, and so many still believe it. This is Jack Keane talking about the fact that last month or so, Joe Biden gave authorization for Ukraine to use American weapons to fire into Russia. Now, many people were finally saying, okay, well, finally you did that. But that's not enough for a lot of people. They're saying, no, we need even more. Watch this.
The administration isn't coming clean about what's actually happening here. You see that bright red area there across from Ukraine? That is where we can fire HIMARS, or what they call guided multiple rocket launchers, into that. That's 75 kilometers into that. But see all the gray area outside of that? That's the Russian sanctuary where we cannot fire. That's all Russian territory. All the air bases that Russia is using to bomb Ukraine are largely in that area. Those are those little white circles there. Their ground bases, their logistic bases are all in that area. And the administration has told Ukraine they cannot fire the weapons that we've given them. That is absolutely makes no sense. And it's really handcuffing them in their ability to protect their own people, but also in their ability to bring down the military capability that Russia has. Ukraine, we can turn the tide in their favor, and the administration has got to stop handicapping them.
That one is, it's just an example, but that as a military man just makes me grind my teeth, because he's sitting there on national television. He's a paid contributor to Fox News, which means he's on all the time. And they always talk about how important he is. And he's, a former 4-star general, is a vice chief of staff of the Army while he was on active duty. So obviously people think, well, whatever he says is true, because I wasn't a 4-star general. I wasn't in the military. I don't know, people who are watching that will think that. But here's the problem. From somebody who was in the military, did spend a full career inside there, had 4 combat deployments, trained people for war. I can tell you that what he says there is just insanely inaccurate. First of all, let's look at what he's suggesting. What we can do is turn the tide. He actually said that, turn the tide of the war by expanding the target list into Russia. We just saw that by those weapons already being used in Crimea, has apparently caused Russia to say, here's a no pin line, a no penetration line. This is a hard red line. You've crossed it. Now that if you fly any more of your drones, we're going to take them out. We'll see if that happens here. But the fact that Putin has said before that, by the way, I have a nuclear doctrine that has the use of tactical nuclear weapons. It's in my doctrine. You can read it. He said he made that point. I think it was on the 5th or 6th of June. On a publicly released statement that he had a press conference in there. He keeps saying over and over, there is a red line, and don't call my bluff here, because if it gets to the territorial integrity and security of my country, this is our doctrine. And now here you got Jack Keane saying, let's fire deeper into Russia. So he's oblivious to the fact that could be a literal trigger, if he's successful, that Putin could use nuclear weapons here. That's the first point. But the second point might even be bigger. That is just nonsense. That is just like somebody who's never even been in the military, who's only played video games, to think, yeah, this could turn the tide there if we did that. Just hitting a few air bases with the amount of long-range weapons we have is clearly not going to work. And if you need proof, and I say this concretely, proof that will never work, because all you got to do is look at what Russia has been doing since the beginning of this war. They have fired literally thousands upon thousands of missiles and drones throughout the Ukrainian territory, hitting their infrastructure, their military infrastructure, weapons depots, energy systems, energy creating capacity, command and control centers, all kinds of things on a regular basis, and they have. Has that brought the war to an end? Has that ended the Ukraine side's ability to fight? We're 2.5 years in. You can make that call. Obviously, it hasn't. And that's with thousands upon thousands of these long-range weapon systems. Now, by what logic can you say that a handful of Western weapons firing into these bases that the Russians have here deep inside is going to stop the Russian military, this huge expanse that Russia has, one of the biggest active duty armies on the planet at the moment, and all of the resources they have, that somehow that is going to end the war? All it's going to do is make them more angry, and more interested in fighting to the end. So what he's saying there is just absolutely counterfactual to the truth. And it's so evident and so obvious to anyone willing to look at the issues on the ground. And there's a third issue with his comments there. We don't have thousands of these long-range missiles and weapons to use anyway, because we have had so few of them in our own inventories. That's one of the reasons why we've had that few of them to go in there. Also, the drones that shot, not drones, I'm sorry, the missiles that shot into Sevastopol I referenced, these long-range missiles, the ones he wants to fire deeper. All 5 of those were shot down by the Russian air defenses. Their ability to shoot down and to manufacture interceptor missiles is way beyond what we have, because they're in an all-out war. They are in an existential fight from their perspective, and their industry is now full on in a war economy. The West isn't. Ours isn't. We've expanded. I think that $61 billion expanded our interceptor missile capacity from 500 a year to 600 a year. So a relatively small incremental. You can go through that in a couple of months, 3 or 4 months of high intensity usage. That's it. And then you're done for the rest of the year. And it'll take another year for you to start that process again. You see where this is going. We don't have enough long range missiles. We don't have enough interceptor missiles to be able to engage in a sustained combat with Russia. And that here's this 4-star general saying that. He's delusional. He's disconnected from reality, and he's leading people astray. So it's going to be a product of, pardon me, what happens next. I don't see any prospect that Biden is even going to stay in the race, much less win. Pardon me. You have President Biden who's saying he's willing to end the war, and we're going to see if he makes good on that. I can't imagine him doing anything beside that. I know some people on his staff, on his campaign, and they tell me that's exactly what he plans to do if he wins. They told me this before the debate, and he said the same thing there. And everything he said prior to that in his time in office indicates that's what he would do. So then the United States needs to start coming to reality right now that this war is not going to continue on. Pardon me, just a minute. I apologize for that. But that's where we are here. There is so much delusion going on in Washington, D.C., among the Democratic Party with Joe Biden, in Kiev, but where it's not is in Russia. They're sober-minded on this. They understand what's at stake, and they see what they're willing to do to achieve their goals. And what we need to do right now is do what Professor Sachs recommended in this war, bring it to a conclusion, get the best deal we can, and then maintain our security and start the process of rebuilding. That's the only thing that makes any sense. Anything else just courts disaster, and in a worst-case scenario, nuclear exchange. That's your deep dive for today. Folks, appreciate you coming on, especially on a Saturday and watching us. Also, just wanted to let you know, next week is the 4th of July week here in the United States, and that's always a big vacation time. But there's too many things happening in the world. We're not going to take that time off. We're going to have some great shows for you next week. We got Colonel McGregor, MIT Professor Ted Postal, the ever-popular Larry Johnson coming back on, and probably many more. We're going to have anything in breaking news, we're going to be right on top. But you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to bring you the truth and the things that are going on and the right analysis and the truth of what's going on. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.